So hello and welcome to the YouTube podcast series of Citiesabc, Open Business Council, Fashion ABC, and Nacvalovaite. I'm Hilton Super, the Vice Chairman of Student Group. Today I'm interviewing Dr. Nacvalovaite, who's a research fellow at Kellogg College, University of Oxford, where we interview people who are changing the world, people who are inspiring us with their achievements and creativity, acumen, and the use of technology. Now, in previous interviews, Nacvalovaite and I have interviewed over 250 amazing people and achieved more than 15 million views of the 146,000 subscribers on YouTube. Now, this interview series on Citiesabc is in partnership with our platforms openbusinesscouncil.org, a Web3 4IR-based platform utilizing technology to employ the use of truth and trust through unique corporate digital identity using blockchain and the deployment of data analytics, AI, and machine learning. Now, today I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Anna.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here.
So you're in Oxford at the college at this present time.
Indeed, I am in Oxford and it's almost sunny here, so that is wonderful to see. It is a bit quiet because most of the students have left for the summer holidays, but we continue to do our research work.
Absolutely. So you're a highly accomplished researcher specializing in essentially human rights law and sovereign wealth funds. And your academic background, you did an MSc in international human rights law and a DPhil, which focused on the regulation in terms of sovereign wealth funds. Currently, Anna is involved in a 3-year research project in collaboration with Professor Jonathan Mickey at Kellogg Centre for Mutual and Co-owned Businesses, which really involves around supporting social and environmental sustainability and directing investments for funds towards these sort of like local cooperatives that are implementing that and receiving the funds, all in line with the social development goals of number 13. So tell us a little bit more about your background, where you came from, and what got you to where you are today with the passion you have for sustainability.
With great pleasure. I was born in Lithuania and grew up in Poland and the UK, so culturally diverse and intellectually vibrant environment. And my upbringing has always given me a unique perspective on global issues. So that fueled my passion for human rights from a young age. And I pursued my journey in the US, gaining some experience in the international relations field, which was invaluable. I worked in protection of children in armed conflict, and the area was profoundly challenging, but very rewarding. And it allowed me to see where real impact on the lives of the most vulnerable was needed. So I soon came to realize the potential of sustainable finance and impact investment as a mechanism for facilitating positive change on a global scale. So this led me to focus my career, leaving the human rights path behind as a lawyer, but very much focusing on human rights research. And I returned to Oxford, as you mentioned, to do my DPhil and focused on regulation of sovereign wealth funds, sustainable finance, and the intersection with public policy. It's aimed to understand how state capital can be effectively utilized. And the research that I do now focuses also on sustainable impact investing as a powerful tool for positive change. I look at state capital and sovereign wealth funds in particular.
I mean, the sovereign wealth funds that most people are familiar with tend to be in what we call Northern Europe. They tend to be in that arc of the Petroleum Fund in Norway, the Swedish Swed Fund, then you've got Finn Fund, and then the Netherlands, they have their own sovereign wealth fund. Even the Swiss have their own sovereign wealth funds. And a lot of them do have lots of projects in terms of investing in different countries. So what you're doing in terms of the work, what impact are you bringing and what benefits are you bringing to sovereign wealth funds to help them align with their mission, which a lot of them have sustainable missions anyway, but how to put that into reality?
Well, there is no easy way of doing that because every sovereign wealth fund is dependent on the state that it is run by. So they all have mandates, and mandates are set by the countries that govern them. It is essentially citizens' money, and the priority is to ensure that above all, they are profitable for the generations of the citizens in the country that they belong to. Mm-hmm. And as hard as they try to make a difference, they on occasion are very successful, if you look at Norway. But Norway as a fund can only invest outside of Norway. It cannot make any inward investment. That is a mandate that has been created by the Ministry of Finance. You look at sovereign wealth funds like the Rwandan Fund, and it is very focused on inward investment because they are truly trying to ensure that by bringing blended finance to the country, they can not only rebuild the economy, but make it a very strong case for why investment in Rwanda and Rwandan business really is the way forward. Agaciro is a fund that was started 10 years back. It was funded by the citizens by voluntary contributions to begin with, which is quite unique in itself. But then it was also funded by licensing from companies that came in to do business in Rwanda. So if you were perhaps looking to purchase license to operate in a certain gold mine, for example, the certain percentage of that went into the funds of the Agaciro Fund. Now, 10 years later, it actually has managed to pay great dividends to the individuals that have put money in, which is the citizens of the country, and has brought forward the concept of blended finance into the country. So, for example, when I look at the research of cooperatives, which essentially is a conversation that a lot of sovereign wealth funds get very nervous about, cooperatives are not exactly the businesses that sovereign wealth funds are happy to invest into on account of the due diligence cost that comes with the business. And so when you look at the idea of a small cooperative from 10 to 20 individuals, it becomes extremely expensive and inefficient. So you need to cluster them together in a group. What the Rwandan government is looking to do is putting perhaps all the agricultural cooperatives that require funds and co-investing. So putting 30% down, then ensuring that a development agency will put another 30%, will then make it a very lucrative investment for sovereign wealth funds from other countries or for private equity to come in. Therefore, this is quite a unique model of investment into its own country by a sovereign wealth fund. But from the conversations that I had with Agaciro Sovereign and Wealth Fund, investment fund, is that ESG is itself ingrained in cooperatives and employee-owned businesses because it's a community that comes together and really wants to look after its own people and after its own generations in the future, as well as the environmental factor. They are living in the towns where they're producing goods or delivering services. So it is in their interest to ensure that it is there and it continues to develop over the years to come. Hence, it's a really interesting comparative study. When you take a Middle Eastern fund such as ADIA, they are not keen to go in and invest into cooperatives or employee-owned businesses just for the reasons that I have spoken about. But smaller funds like Agaciro in Rwanda is very happy to do so. And it's a unique partnership that has not been seen in a lot of countries that have sovereign wealth funds. I have recently returned from it's a 10th anniversary of Agaciro Development Fund in Rwanda, and they had a second meeting of African sovereign wealth funds. They had a forum where they had 12 members. The latest members to join was an Ethiopian Authority Investment Fund and Mauritius. And they all are talking about co-investment in Africa, investment into their own countries, and really claiming back the businesses that could bring profit and benefit to their own citizens.
So what you're talking about is a very interesting development in Africa. We're talking about there's a natural built-in environmental component to the mandates that any of these funds or cooperatives have. There's the social component, which is the community and the cooperative. Then you've got the G of the ESG, which is the governance of that, which is the real challenge for large, as you mentioned, large sovereign wealth funds. Anyway, how much can the G be made more transparent with, I know you're not a technologist, but the use of technology?
Oh my goodness. I think technology really brings strong future towards what is going to be happening. First of all, when we look at the regulatory framework and policies in terms of governance, those play a crucial role in encouraging investments that prioritize not just the societal aspects of ESG, but ensuring that G really has a strong grip on what is being developed. Mm-hmm. And technology shapes initiatives for both investors and businesses. It helps to guide their behavior, and at the very least gives us a guidance at what the minimum standards for social performance can be. I think that there are a number of policies that can work hand in hand with developing technologies. And if I may just bring the concept of just transition into this conversation, because technological just transition is very much on the mandate of most governments currently, because no one ought to be left behind, especially as we're looking at technology taking a very strong stand as to how we're going to be paying our bills, digitalization of currency, a really healthcare, educational system. It's an all-encompassing package that needs to be supported by the governance of every country, and businesses and practitioners like yourself need to be very heavily involved with all the other stakeholders to make them understand how this can be implemented, to ensure that businesses deliver social benefits that technology is there for. In my opinion, the priority of technology is to ensure that we receive social benefits as citizens of every country in terms of the possibilities that technology can bring to the table.
And I mean, how much do the sovereign wealth funds and pools of capital rely on the expertise of very, very talented and people like yourselves, professors, the academic world? How important does the academic world play in the decision-making process for a lot of these initiatives of sovereign wealth funds?
I would like to see more space for academics at the table. The situation has changed significantly in the last decade. There is more access. I have certainly had a very warm welcome from all the stakeholders, from the sovereign wealth funds, from the governments, from the legislators, because essentially when I set out to do my PhD 12 years ago now, and then I started this particular project that I'm working on a year ago, people want to understand what it is that is driving society and the broader societal well-being, what it is that needs to be done. And academics have a very unique perspective. It is not biased. Hence, that exchange of knowledge is very important. And the conversations that I have, I was at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh last year. I'm heading to Dubai in November for COP28. And as an academic, I'm invited and truly listened to in terms of what the possibilities are and how it is that we should drive the ESG disclosure forward. How can we talk to regulators? What is important to the policymakers? And how can governments really employ the best individuals to make a change? Also, if I may, what I have observed in the last decade is that take the Chinese funds or the Middle Eastern funds, for example, they have very heavily relied on professionals from overseas. But in the last 10 to 5 years, they have grown their own professionals, which have been educated in the West, have worked in large corporations, really understood what the Western culture's business is about, and then have gone back to their own countries, to the sovereign wealth funds of their own states, and were able to create very strong management teams with professionals across the globe, but also with homegrown talent. And that has made very significant difference in how they see their investment platforms now.
So in terms of the investment platforms, the discussions with academia tend to be at the beginning of the journey, or the beginning of a journey of a particular project, or the nascent growth of a project. But how much does academia play in the ongoing transparency and guidance and mentorship of the different programs that academia gets involved in?
I would say it varies on the individuals that you are in contact with. It absolutely depends on the sector involved with in the country and in the project that they're looking at. When it comes, and I can speak to from the perspective of ESG, I can speak to a specializes in S. So I have very intense conversation about how they won't, well, and when I say they, I mean sovereign wealth funds in this particular case, are interested in ensuring how their policies can be implemented to protect human rights, to ensure good governance, and of course, focus on environment, which is a very significant topic right now when our planet is going through such difficult times geopolitically, and of course in terms of climate change. It is very important to have the best academics at the table, and these may not be just specialists in human rights like myself, but scientists who are giving their own research and time to really look at how mandates can be focused around ensuring that we're making the best decisions in terms of regulations and laws and just transition for societies that do not have the means to make the environmental changes at the same rate that the Western states can.
I mean, this brings to, you talk about environmental change, and E is a very important component of the ESG spectrum. But if you think about small projects, cooperatives, etc., investment in these projects in Africa, for example, the environmental component is embedded because that's the only way to survive and be some level of sustainability there. But the impact on change is small, whereas the larger developed countries, any small change in behavior has a larger impact on potential minimization of greenhouse gases, etc., etc. How does that, I mean, because everybody goes and praises environmental projects in Rwanda or whatever, but the impact on climate change is going to be very, very small. How do we address that imbalance?
It is a difficult question, Hilton, because as we look, and you were very correct in saying that it's the level of impact that larger states that are more advanced have by making small changes than those lesser advanced countries have when they try to implement the same change. But if I really look at it, I think it is all about inclusive innovation and about building bridges and relationships between what we call developed countries and developing countries, because so much is in public and private partnerships. If you bring governments and businesses onto the same platform, that can help adopt an inclusive approach that involves developing products and services that really focus on ensuring that ESG is at the heart of communities and ESG is at the heart of profit. And I'm not talking about profit before people in a way that there should be no profitable businesses. No, not at all. I'm talking about initiatives where we're thinking long term, which is where sovereign wealth funds are ideal partners, where state capital is ideal because they're patient and they can provide the wider community with skills development, with education, with in-house training initiatives, and that security that a community in a developing nation needs. And when I say developing nation, it is not just the developing nations whose communities need support. Let us look at the situation in England. I believe that, and I do not have the statistics in front of me, but there is a significant percentage of children in economically underdeveloped areas in the UK who are surviving on one meal a day. There is a high rate of illiteracy. We cannot really compare ourselves in the way that we used to perhaps 5 or 10 years ago to developing countries, because they are taking control of the funds that they have. They're coming together as a community, and they're really making sure that the investments are becoming thoughtful. They're protecting the environment. They are protecting their community. They're striving for good governance and less corruption because people are taking their power back.
That's very interesting. No, but this is a very interesting development, because if you look at across the board, businesses need to change. They need to change to embrace all the elements of ESG into their process, because if they don't change, regulation will force them to do that. So they better get ahead of the curve now, because the cost of change is huge if you have to do it very quickly. And you mentioned you mentioned something earlier. You I think it's the second time you mentioned the concept of just transition. Can you, for our audience, explain how important this is in the discussions that people are having around sustainability and sustainable finance?
Of course. So the concept of just transition can be applied in a number of spheres. Primarily, we talk about it in finance, but also in technology, which goes hand in hand with finance. And so to ensure that the benefits of, for example, technological advancements are equitably distributed and contribute to inclusive growth, we need a just transition. There are countries which are simply not going to be able to ensure the same speed in terms of the way that the growth of technology usage is adopted by people in their countries. What we have in the UK or in Europe or in the States allows for individuals to have more access to technology, more area coverage with internet access, and more inclusive growth. A lot of other states don't have the same possibility. Again, you have got geopolitical reasons for that. We know that there's a lot of conflict in the world. We also have no coverage in a number of areas, or no access to technology. You simply don't have the tablets, the computers, the laptops, or the educators to teach the young people or the elderly or the disabled who do not have the possibility to catch on that quickly. So just transition in this case that I'm talking about, for example, is about promoting digital inclusion and ensuring that when we make the regulation about just transition, we really are sensitive about the timing. So what the West can do in a year by, for example, as an argument, if there was digital transition to completely digital currency, I think the UK, Europe, and the West could really accept it much faster. You look at other states, it would be more problematic because you would need much more education to ensure that equal access to technology. And so businesses and investors and governments can actively invest in digital infrastructure in underserved communities. It is also a business opportunity. And this includes not only physical infrastructure, such as broadband networks, but also initiatives to improve digital literacy, such as training programs and educational resources. So all of that inclusive innovation is just transition.
I get it now. I mean, that whole just transition is inclusivity, it's accessibility, and all those elements that gives everybody the ability to transform equally.
Yes, absolutely, and leaves no one behind, which is very important.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned about digital aspects in terms of the transfer of value and the various mechanisms to do that. There's the like in Africa, the transfer of value is basically sending data to somebody, and that's redeemed for cash, which is M-Pesa. The mechanism is just the data cost. Whereas digital techniques, other currencies which are from Bitcoin, Ether, and the rest, are used quite extensively in developing countries. And that's basically solving very quickly a pain point for a lot of people, because they don't, they have a quick way of sending money home or sending money to buy goods, or even in the marketplace do a quick exchange of value for the goods that they are selling in the marketplace, and they don't have to walk home with wads of cash in their pocket, which is a security issue. But there's all these little pain points that some form of digitization has enabled the just transition in the economies. So those tools do exist. I would say that they have much more of an impact on developing countries than the developed countries, because if we need money, we go to a cash machine, or if we want to pay for something, we can. It's an easy value transfer mechanism. We don't even have to think about it. In other countries, it's the only transfer mechanism that is available, which is safe, secure, and has a high utility.
Absolutely, and you're looking at some places which have great issues with logistics. So some of the villages, if you look at, for example, India, they're so remote. It takes 3-4 hours to get there. So what do? They have drones dropping off medication. You have got a lot of technology that is already being used. So perhaps 90 to 95% of the country will have internet coverage. 95% of the individuals will have access to a mobile phone, but there is 60% of people who have access to running water. So it is also about getting priorities right, and making sure that we are doing this as a foundation block to ensuring that we're getting places by 2030 for the Sustainable Development Goals. And education and skills development is a huge portion of that.
So in your engagement with the sovereign wealth funds in terms of the investment practices along the ESG lines, a lot of them look at maybe the environment bit, or some of them look at a social bit or a financial bit or a governance. How many of the sovereign wealth funds, when they look at a project, look at it in the round, look at all the different aspects of the environment, the social, the governance, and then of course the resilience of the project?
The data when it comes to sovereign wealth fund investment is not exactly as clear as we would like it to be, primarily because sovereign wealth funds are just that, they're sovereign. And whilst there is a method of them to disclose what investments they have made, and some of the funds are very transparent, such as the Norwegians or the New Zealand fund, you are able to pretty much ask any question you want and you are going to get an answer, or at least an email back directing you towards the project that you're inquiring about. So it is very transparent. You just need to have access to technology and understanding of what it is that you're reading. It's accessible. When it comes to many other funds, it is very difficult to know what data we are receiving in terms of accuracy, whether it is something that they're choosing to disclose because it is convenient for them at that particular time, or there's a myriad of issues that the data that we have from the funds is not 100%. I hesitate to say the word trusty, but perhaps accurate. And when it comes to, I don't know if you're familiar with Santiago principles. It is a set of principles that was put together for sovereign wealth funds to really reflect upon and self-report when it comes to good practice. And because sovereign wealth funds, as I say, by nature, are not obliged to report to anybody outside their own country, and even within their own country, they only are reporting to their relevant financial institutions and the heads of state, there is a lot of work that needs to be done in order for us to understand how it is that their investments truly have an impact on ESG and the work that they do, or how it trickles down to their suppliers, to businesses that they invest to, and to the individuals that work there. Because the social capital that sovereign wealth funds employ or invest into really must stand for a lot in terms of the disclosure of ESG investments that they're making.
That's right. I mean, so from what I'm hearing is that the level of transparency is not necessarily we don't disclose. It's just there's no mechanisms in place for that this level of disclosure because of the nature of the sovereignty of the governance of that. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. It is very opaque. And even if a fund said, well, I'm willing, if you give me 10 questions, I'm willing to answer those 10 questions, but I am not willing to give you the documentation that will stand behind these answers because you are going to have to take my word for it. So even when we talk about assets under management, overall, in reality, a lot of these numbers are estimated.
Okay. That's very interesting.
It also makes it very difficult for everybody involved to establish what it is that we're working with. How much money do really certain sovereign wealths have? How much money is in assets under management? What is really the divide between the sectors that they're looking into? It is very complex.
Mm-hmm. And this might be a difficult question to answer, but if you look at sovereign wealth funds, there's two components. There's the altruistic component to this. There's also an economic component, which is beneficial to the state, okay, based on economics and also on political, which is tied with the economics. Is that the reason why that opacity exists?
Yes, I would say so. We are now living in a society that is more transparent than ever, arguably, because of the access to technology and social media, and consumers are asking questions. Rightly so. It is important to have accountability in any business, and governments are not excluded from that. But there is certainly an understanding that affairs or inner affairs of a country are very much private to the government and the citizens of that country.
And it's all countries. It's not just one or two in particular.
Absolutely, absolutely. But there are states that very happily disclose that. When we look at Norway, they're content with being very direct and transparent about it, and others for a number of reasons, cultural history. There's so many things that prevent them, in their own words, from disclosing what it is that they're invested into, how much funds they really have under management. And a lot of it is geopolitical. I mean, at the end of the day, when you disclose your complete financial situation and where your stakes are, arguably it can make you vulnerable to those who you might consider to be your enemies.
No, I totally understand. So in your interaction with all the sovereign wealth funds in the States and international organizations, how do you guide and mentor them through the process of increasing and integrating the sustainability and best practices into the decision making and investment?
Well, I'm a great supporter of stakeholder engagement. So the conversation always begins about actively engaging with the communities they impact, involving communities in decision-making processes and taking their needs and concerns into account. And that, to me, makes the very foundation of a good fund. It involves regular consultations, partnerships with local organizations, efforts to increase community representations in leadership positions, because we must remember that for a number of investments, for any fund or any business, you really need to be able to address the leaders within the communities where you're going to invest. And if you're going to a place in the Middle East or in Africa, you need to be able to speak to the elders within a community where it is that you're looking to set up your business or invest into. That requires ability to have an open discussion and to be really considerate and sensitive to what the country may have been through, what it is that they're looking for, and how it is that you can, in a diplomatic way, come together. There is a lot of diplomacy involved in investment by sovereign wealth funds, and there are specialists who go through a lot of training and a lot of education to ensure that they choose the right people to do business with and take the needs and the concerns of the citizens when they do so into account. I just wish it was more transparent, and I just wish that we could read more about it and study it more so that we can have more educated conversations about how investors can contribute to equitable distribution of wealth and investments globally.
I mean, you talked earlier on about, you mentioned Rwanda. But can, for just, I think to sort of bring this down to sort of a familiarity, can you give us some examples of some of the work that you've done that has really, you can say, well, we've done the E bit, the S bit, we just need to finish off the G bit, or we've done the ESG bit all the way through and it could be better. Just give us some examples of the things that, have worked and maybe some that have not.
Well, I do so with pleasure. One of the recent projects that I have been able to visit, which left a lasting impact on me, was in fact in Kigali about 3 weeks ago. And I went to a cooperative, which was supported or invested into by the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Rwanda. And what was interesting, they produce loafer products. So I don't know if you're familiar with what that is. It is
please
essentially
explain to the audience, please. Yeah,
it is something like that. You will find them in beauty shops and body shops. You can use these as sponges, and you would probably have seen something like that. Somewhere along your journey. It is essentially a pumpkin that grows in the fields, doesn't require much looking after. It looks like a squash, a little bit of long version of a squash. And at first it can be eaten, but past a certain date, they have a big center, which is roughage, essentially, that is dry roughage. They peel it, they compress it, and they can make items for personal hygiene from it. They have actually even managed to make little Christmas toys like that for it. And they have an extraordinary production line where they, due to the fact that the Sovereign Wealth Fund was behind them, were able to secure funders from other states. And now they are cornering the luxury market of hotels in Rwanda and neighboring countries. But the beauty of it is that 40% of the profit goes towards ensuring that women who have breast cancer have a safe house to go to when they are going through treatment. And is a whole group of educators that comes in and really educates the family of what the women are going through and what help they may require, whilst at the same time giving them a job, giving them a possibility to have an income, an equal distribution of proceeds when the business expands. So that is an extraordinary success story, because that is a cooperative that was supported by the government. Government still holds a percentage in it, also contributes towards a wonderful cause that is educational and charity, and still is a cooperative that is for profit.
The real challenge here is how to scale something like that.
Yes. And this has been a very difficult journey in terms of scaling. And you have asked the question, as a businessman that you are, that I get asked every time I go to a fund, be it a state sovereign wealth fund or a smaller private equity fund, where they say, how do we scale it? How do we do diligence on it? Therefore, the whole concept is now creating a vehicle between a sovereign wealth fund and a group of cooperative or a group of employee-owned businesses that will manage the due diligence and turn it into a profitable venture, which is quite a job in itself. We are working on it amongst academics and colleagues from various departments, and we very much hope to see come that into fruition, because these are incredible items. But I just love the idea behind the community. And when I spoke to the individuals that work there, they said, we take pride in the job that we do, and we want to do better, and we work harder because it belongs to us, to each one of us. So the work ethic is extraordinary. They're working at a pace.
So the individuals are stakeholders in the business, and they see the benefits of that because it's a cooperative.
Yes.
By structure.
Absolutely.
And it's a community-based decision-making process.
Indeed. And that means that when it comes to ESG, it's at the very core of the whole entity. You don't have to worry about it. They want the environment around their homes to be in perfect condition for themselves and their family. They want the society to be at the heart because they are the people who are working for it. And they want their children to, and their family members, the elders, to be looked after. So the whole community thrives. And the governance is there because it's supported by a sovereign wealth fund. It is looked at by the elders within the community as something of an example. And so you have got a very strong feeling of a business for good, but also for profit. And this expansion is extraordinary. I understand your question entirely, and I agree that scaling something like that is not easy. But I strongly believe that when it comes to will, possibility, and more importantly, support of the government funds, it is certainly something that can grow and become the new model for social enterprise globally for good.
I mean, at the end of the day, if the marketplace that these products are being sold into has strong ESG elements in the way that these businesses function, there's a natural connection, there's a natural marketplace. They are partners, collaborators, clients, whatever you want to, all the different dimensions. So they recognize the benefits of working with products that have an ESG core rather than just an ESG label to it. Because there's a lot of these ESG labels around.
Yes, absolutely.
How do you get over that?
Oh my goodness. This whole concept of greenwashing things and ensuring that you look a certain way, but really when you get to the core of the industry or the business, nothing has changed. It is just another label that they have put on their website or another training course that they have done for their own benefit. It makes me sad, but I guess that is human nature. And unless we truly become better at holding ourselves and our colleagues accountable, and we stop being afraid of asking questions, and there is government interference in ensuring that there are bonuses for really being ESG compliant and punishments for lying, which is fraud, in this space, we are not going to have much success. We need to come together as a community. But look, there are so many examples that illustrate the positive financial and social outcomes of investment made with focus on ESG. I don't know if you are aware of a social innovation fund that was that Danone Social Innovation Fund. It's a global food beverage company which established a fund in 2011 to finance projects that support social business initiatives within its subsidiaries. And one of the projects supported by the fund was the development of fortified yogurt products in Bangladesh that tackled malnutrition. And the project had a significant positive impact on local communities, but also it created a new market for Danone products. So it goes hand in hand. It's just, I guess, the methodology and the legislation in the countries where you go, it needs to be built from the ground up. And you really have to understand the community and the cultures, how you can cultivate businesses like that. So you can grow a big international business, but create opportunity for small local initiatives as well. And I think that is the marriage that I'm talking about.
Well, basically, you're talking about a sustainable, transparent supply chain.
Indeed, which I think is very, very important. But you, as an individual that works with technology, I presume can tell me and educate me much more on the idea of how we really know what goes from the ground to the table and how we're going to be able to really understand each step within supply chain very soon. In fact, I have seen a number of packages of the food that I buy where when you scan, you can really see where it has come from. And I think that is beautiful because you're connected to the community that is providing you.
Yeah, I mean, that technology exists, and we have that technology, architected But the real challenge is its adoption. The thing is, a lot of these things tend to be built in silos for the benefit of a particular supply chain rather than an industry.
I would love to actually ask you a question, if I may.
Please.
I'm learning about technology, and I understand that it has the most important space in business today, because without technology, we cannot do anything. What it is that you feel is currently under-researched, and where it is that academics can really be of help in terms of data acquisition and, more importantly, sustainable and transparent data, which I think is currently lacking in a number of fields.
I mean, there's two sources of data. Well, there's more, but broadly, there's data which is public, and then there's what I call private data. Public data is easy to get hold of because technology, even down to Internet of Things. I mean, already my washing machine is talking to me on my mobile phone. I mean, and it's used by the company that manufactures it for maintenance and warranties and things like that. I mean, and public data is Google. When you're driving in your car and you're on Google Maps, it'll tell you that there's a traffic jam up ahead. Any reason is because there's lots of people with their mobile phones on, and the data of them now all slowing down together and concatenating together means that because they were driving before, they're not driving, they're stationary, there must be a traffic jam. So that's public data. Then there's private data, and use an academic, and that's why we like working with academic institutions, because somebody does a research project, goes out and gets a lot of data, writes up their thesis. They then get their thesis marked, they get their PhD. That data is now locked in time over that data set. It sits in a silo, okay? And it may be used by some of the other research students. Oh, there's some interesting data over there. Why didn't you use some of that to da-da-da? That is a very inefficient system because it's very, very good data. It's very rich data, but it's not available to everybody else. Because first of all, they don't know it's there. And number two, if it is there, who owns that data? Are they going to make it public, or are they going to sell it? There's loads of issues to do with that because it's tied to a PhD project, and the PhD is from a particular university. So there's lots of issues to do with that, which makes it very difficult for us to access that information unless we sponsor a PhD project in order to get the data. So just as much as academic papers are available on the internet, every time you want to read one, you have to pay somebody to read it. And I understand the business model, but the same thing, the data behind that is, you don't even see it. You see the results of that. But if the world had access to that data, then we will be able to make much more effective products or projects and technology products. Because as I remember, just as journalism is the first level of transparency in governance, which is government, I feel that academia has a role to play in the technology space because they keep us honest and true.
Thank you for saying that. I think you very much hit the nail on the head. I couldn't agree more with all of your observations. And I would love to see a future where that gets fixed and there is synergy and exchange of knowledge, because in many, many situations, just like you said, these wonderful years of research go onto a library shelf to die. And that is very, very sad.
Absolutely. And now that you're with Kellogg College in Oxford, and they it's a new college, it was started in 1990 with a great supporter. and it's focusing on sustainability. I think that's something that would benefit society if all the wonderful work that work that you're doing can be, even if Kellogg are responsible for that information and make that information easy to access for commercial and non-commercial reasons. But at the end of the day, they could leverage that significantly.
I will certainly keep that in mind and keep the conversation open, because I support you entirely on this.
Dr. Anna, thank you very much indeed for the most wonderful hour. And I'm looking forward to actually doing this again, because I think this is a fantastic subject: environmental, social, governance, transparency, and particularly to do with implementation. And you've demonstrated a great passion and great knowledge and drive towards this area from an academic perspective. And do hope that we can continue the conversation, because I do believe that this is going to be helpful in developing sustainable goals going forward.
Thank you very much for your time. The pleasure has been entirely mine, and I look forward to continuing the discussion. Please do let me know when you're back at Oxford. It'll be my pleasure to host you at Kellogg.
Thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you for viewing and engaging with today's podcast. If you're interested in knowing more about citiesabc.com with openbusinesscouncil.org, go to our platforms, as well as you can also find me on social media and direct message me, Hilton Super, on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And do go to the other interviews we have done on YouTube. And don't forget to like and comment. So thank you very much for your time and engaging with this interview today on Citiesabc.